Well, I don't know how you're doing, but I have to admit that I'm really looking forward to getting back to normal. And there's a whole lot of people in our team, and just doing church like this. There's so many new skills that everybody is working on, learning. There's a whole lot of things we've never done before, and for those of us that are constantly at work, trying to keep things moving and keep things going forward. Zoom was a fantastic discovery. But I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to the day that Zoom was something we talked about, not necessarily something that we lived on every day of our lives. But anyway, I guess the big question is, as we move forward in this, and this is 5 weeks of doing church like this, and I think it was day 29, and I guess at the start of everything, I posed this simple question, and that was, how are we gonna come out of this? How am I going to come out of this? Am I going to come out of this as a better self? Am I going to come out a better person? Am I going to come out, or are you going to come out as an example of His faithfulness, that you found Him at work in your life, in areas of struggle and areas of great doubt and challenge and all those sorts of things. As a church, how are we going to come out of this, which is important also? Are we going to come out a church that's better for it? What sort of impact, what sort of role will the church? I'm believing that the Church of Jesus Christ is going to have a major impact on the shape that society takes as we move forward. The church. Jesus said to Peter, he says on Peter's revelation of who Jesus was, he said, and upon this revelation, I'm going to build my church. And then he goes on, he says, and the gates of hell are not going to prevail against it. The gates of hell hate vengeance, selfishness, pain, suffering, disease, all of the things that ail humanity. The church is God's, I believe, is God's tool, God's way of being able to show that there is a God in heaven who cares about everything that's going on in people's lives. And those things will not prevail. The word church, and I'm talking to Ben Blummel, and I may have said this before, but it's a word that we've sort of taken on and gone, hey, this is a Bible word. But actually, from what I understand, it's a secular word. And it was a term that was used to invoke the idea of a people being called aside for a purpose. And I can't help but think in this time now, as we're reflecting on so many things, that maybe the importance of the church, a collection of people, a group of people who've been called aside for a purpose, and maybe that greater purpose, and it's not a maybe, but I believe the greater purpose of the church is to reveal God to people who don't know Him in so many ways. And even as you look into the early church, we're talking about church now. What is church going to look like as they let us out of this, what everyone's calling a lockdown? Does it just go straight back to normal? I don't know, but I do know one thing, that probably one of the first parts that's going to take place is the fact that we were able to meet together, maybe not meet together in our hundreds or our thousands, but surely they're going to let us actually be able to meet together in homes, not too different to the early church. And the early church was marked by four things. It was marked by their devotion to the apostles' teaching, marked by their devotion to prayer, the common meal, which is such an important thing. What I understand about the common meal, there was a part of custom back then is if you actually ate with someone, you actually said to someone, me eating with you is a saying to you that we're going to be friends forever. And I guess that's why Jesus got in so much trouble for eating with sinners. The Pharisees, who saw themselves as the great custodians of all the things of God, just got upset with him. But the word fellowship also, fellowship, living our life in a certain way where others and the well-being of other people are our focus. And I've been really encouraged as we gone through these last weeks and lockdown and all of that, and just hearing back all the fantastic stories of people just, you're just getting alongside each other and helping each other. And it's not a just, because for a lot of people are really hit hard at this moment. And there's a lot of people who have been really sacrificial and saying, what can I do to help other people? And I'm really believing that as we step out of this as a church, and I'll keep saying it because I'm going to keep believing it, that we're going to be able to look back at ourselves and say, hey, look, we managed to look after each other. Not only did we manage to look after each other, but we were able to say, hey, we were able to embrace other people, bring other people into our circle of influence, which is as we can help you. So well done to everyone who's doing what you're doing. So I guess, first part of my message, just this, just that thought of how am I going to come out of this? And I know I've said it before, but I think it's a really it's a good thing to be thinking about, because, as I said last week, it's a little bit like we've been sent to our bedroom to sit back and contemplate life a little bit, and we can't help but think right now there's a lot of self-reflection and all of those things taking place, looking at life, how I've been approaching life up until now, and all that sort of stuff. So a better self. So when I'm talking about a better self, what's a better self look like? And I just was reading just recently, and I just picked up a word, and I thought, I really like this, and I'm gonna take ownership of this. And it's a social self, not a selfless self. As being selfless, if we're not careful, implies that I actually, as a person, that doesn't matter. But a self in the context of how I interact with people around me. Not a selfish self, but a social self. A self that interacts with other people in a way that I guess looks like, if you were to read 1 John and chapter 4, and where as John the writer, and he's talking about God's love towards us and God's love and his impact on us and our expression of that love to the world that we live in, that this social self is perhaps the outworking of God's love to our lives, and then through our lives in other people's lives. Well, so let me just give you a thought to set this up where as we move on. I don't know about you, but I'm one of these people that I love to read lots of stuff about how the world ended up how it is, and how society is what it is, and what's going on, and the consequences of all sorts of things. And I've just been doing a little bit of reading and looking into some things just recently. And I just thought, as I was reading, if you look at the world that we've been raised in right now, and I guess where we find ourselves right now, we've been raised in an era where the importance of self has or the preeminence of self, what's about me, where it's all been about having a good self-esteem, which self-esteem is the ability to have a sense of, my respect for myself, and admire myself, have a pride in myself. And just recently I was reading a book, and it gave a quote from a guy called Will Storr in his book called Selfie, and it's Selfie, how the West has become so self-obsessed and what it's doing to us. And he cites some tests that have been done on this whole self-esteem thing, that if we're not careful, we get so caught up in our own self-esteem. And what they discovered was that the people who had really high scores of self-esteem were more apt to be late to appointments, to be less respectful, be more casual, be more forward, be more condescending, and all the other various antisocial behaviours that we're prone to as human beings. And the studies showed that the pursuit of self-esteem, believe it or not, eventually led to an epidemic of narcissism. And every now and again, if up until now we're in lockdown, I don't know what you're reading and all that, but it was one of those trendy terms where there's an epidemic of narcissism. And then what narcissism does is what it causes is what they thought a high self-esteem would actually prevent. And they thought that a high self-esteem would prevent aggression, materialism, a lack of caring for others, and all the other shallow values that we can live by. And so just maybe the important thing that we can give some focus to is having the right perspective of self, a self that is formed by our understanding of God's love and developing a social self. In other words, a self that's based on the interaction with other people based on God's love. So, big idea, I realize that. So, okay, so I'm not going to touch on all of that today, but just building on that, just a thought. So, social me, God's love, the power that I live by, how living, expressing God's power. Maybe even we can think about it in this context right now, where here we are, some are in isolation and you're there by yourself. Most of us somehow are isolated, or some are using the term locked in, locked down, imprisoned with. All sorts of things could be the way that you're describing things right now. But just take this thought of the social me. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 40, Jesus makes this amazing statement where he says for us to love our enemies. And you know, who's an enemy? An enemy is an adversary. An enemy is someone who's pitched in attitude against us. Maybe you're in a situation now where you've got, hey, I think there's a bit of attitude going on and all that sort of stuff. But you know, when we love our enemies, this is what it does. It breaks down the us versus them mentality, the me versus you thinking. And it starts to get us treating our adversaries with the same love that we would wish for ourselves. And you know, in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus, he just sort of takes everything he taught about, winds it all together, and he says, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So maybe if we just talk that sort of thought of love our enemies, is I'm just going to, those that I'm in there's a bit of adversary going on, a little bit of conflict, I'm going to actually, my new social self is I'm going to think about how I interact with them based on, I'm going to love them how I'd like them to perhaps love me. You know, the thing about God's love is it goes against the grain of our thinking when it comes to when we're in the middle of conflicts. Because in the middle of conflicts, our thinking gets all coloured with all sorts of things like pride and pain. We feel threatened, we feel under attack. And usually when we're in conflict, our primary goal is self-preservation, and that's why hit back or punish and all of those things become part of our fallen nature first response. And I guess Jesus gives the ultimate expression to this, you know, love your enemies, when he's on the cross where he says, Father, forgive them. Because you got to remember, here he is, he's on the cross just before he said that. And he could have called down retribution, he could have called down punishment, but he didn't. He took on the absolute worst of human nature, the absolute worst that human nature was capable of. It was directed straight at him, and he absorbs the whole thing and the death that it brings so that we could be free of it. And so one of the greatest ways I think you can get your mind or your heart around how great God's love is and how deep it is, or even get to experience it, is to express it. If you think about God's love's charged with this tension of, it's an emotional tension it's full of it, and tension of forgiveness, compassion. Hey, I'm going to go out of my way to help someone. Compassion's about having a sense of a co-suffering, a feeling for somebody else, a feeling for what's going on in their life. And empathy, which is about feeling as another. And I guess the thing that I want to say is try it. All right? Now, try it is hard. You're in the middle of conflict. Somebody has hurt you, and your first response is not, hey, I'm going to express love towards them. And sometimes we struggle with just the bigness and the depth and the greatness of God's love. You'd think about Jesus on the cross, everything that he took upon himself, yet his expression was not, I'm not going to retaliate. I'm actually going to express love back towards those who are actually doing what they're doing to me. And if you wonder how big God's love is towards you, you know, if he can absorb all of that, no matter what you think of and what's going on in your life, and you think, well, is God's love real for me? Is his love still with me? All of those things. You just think about the bigness of his love. He's on the cross. Everything that the ugly side of humanity could throw, he took it all in, and he said, hey, I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to punish. I'm just going to express forgiveness and compassion and all of those things towards us. And so maybe some of you right now, you're in the dynamics of where you are in your life. What's going on in your life right now? Maybe there is some conflict and all of that sort of stuff. Then I want to encourage you just to think about, okay, this is my social self. How am I going to handle this tension? How am I going to just pull the tension back and in my engagement with those around me? You know, so anyway, there's a simple thought. I just want to maybe one other thing as we move forward. You know, this COVID-19, this virus, it's the topic of all of our lives. But you've probably noticed, because I've noticed that it's not put the troubles of life on hold, or even erased any of them so we can isolate. So it's not like we went, okay, no trouble, no problems. I've got nothing that I'm dealing with because I've got to isolate. This is going to bring new problems, so everything else is going to stop. Life hasn't done that. And maybe even in this time of isolation, it's brought about some new struggles, some new troubles. You know, we've been talking about creating new habits. And, you know, even this Monday, if you go onto the website, as Dan said, we're going to start this whole lot of meditation guides for the next 21 days of meditating on God's love, starting a new habit. I'm going to start my day, or I'm going to set time aside every day, and I'm going to spend some time with God, new habits. But at the same time, maybe there's been a few unwanted habits that have emerged, things that you're struggling with. There's things we've perhaps been struggling with that we bring into this that have been exacerbated or highlighted, or maybe just there's some new habits that have now I've just got something new to deal with in this moment. And can I say this, that I really believe that God really is for you, and you will find God in this if you draw close to him. And you're going to come through this. And he is going to prove his faithfulness in every area of your life. And you've got to remember, Jesus is our peace. He is our salvation. He's not our punisher. He doesn't withdraw his love towards us when we do the wrong thing. In fact, he extends his love towards us. His desire, I believe, is to intensify our sense of knowing his love when we are in a place where we feel like we've just, hey, I've messed up, I'm doing the wrong thing, I don't know what to do, I can't handle this. And can I just as a side note, you know, if you're living with people or you know someone and suddenly you realize, you know, hey, they're really struggling with someone, you know, don't fall into the trap of punishing those around you, the one that's struggling, but see them as someone who needs healing. And they need healing, they need acceptance, and they don't need punishment and rejection. But let's just take a moment and think about what's going on in your life. Maybe you are struggling with some things, and you know, Paul in Romans chapter 8 and verse 35, he says this. He says, there's absolutely nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. And nothing means nothing last time I checked. So whatever it is that's going on in your life, right? You got to remember there's nothing that can separate you from God's love. And then you keep reading on. You get down to verse 38, and then he says it again. But this time he says, I am convinced. So he starts off with, he says, there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Then he goes on and he says, I'm convinced. I'm convinced there is nothing. And then he starts listing a whole lot of things that, and I'd encourage you, just read on and read all those things that where he says that nothing can separate us from his love. I want to encourage you, you got to see him. He's the God that wants to be and we need to embrace. He's the one that wants to bring wholeness into our life. He wants to be the one, not just as a term, but he wants to bring it in the whole of our being, in the here, the now. He wants a hope, a better future for you. He's the one that rescues us from danger. He's the one that delivers us into safety. He's the one that brings health. He's the one that brings well-being. He's the one that brings wholeness, because he's the one that saves. And not only that, often what you find is times like this, often we find ourselves things that we've, I guess, been struggling with that have always just been a part of the journey, and we find ourselves in a situation like we are now, and things can become amplified. And sometimes those things that we can struggle with is we don't feel like we are living up to the right expectations. Maybe it's expectations of other people. For people, there's been a loss in a lot of people's lives. A loss of, I don't know where my career is going. I don't know what my job is about. I don't know if I still have a business. And there's a whole lot of pressure that can come on. And sometimes those pressures that come is, I don't know how I'm going to fulfill the expectations that are there. And often what we do is we place those expectations on ourselves. And the feeling that if we're not careful, we feel like we're letting people down, or we don't even reach our own expectations on things. We can feel like we're failing as a father, failing as a mother, as a brother, a sister, a daughter, as a son, whatever. But I just want to encourage you that Jesus puts hope in our hearts, and he gives us the ability that we can actually change. And so anyway, I'm getting out of time here. So I just really want to encourage you in this just in this time where you are right now. Don't let your heart get troubled. And if you are struggling, come on, remember there's a God who's there for you, whatever it is that you are that you're struggling with, and you'll get through this. Father, I pray for every single person that I'm speaking to right now, every person that's listening. Lord, no matter where they're at, Lord, where they're perhaps in this situation and thinking about what am I going to come out like? Am I going to come out full of struggles and troubles, or are they going to come out of it and say, hey, I had struggles and I had new ones, and I found the faithfulness of God in this time. I pray that, Lord, as we emerge out of this, that, Lord, those that have been just the thought of my life, what sort of me is going to come out of this? I'm going to be a me that can talk about, hey, I've discovered the faithfulness of God at work in the areas where I would have once given up and said, you know what, this is an area of struggle. That those I want to come out. I want to come out a better me. I want to come out a social, that new me that's, my life is not about myself. I'm not consumed. I've not given in to selfishness, but I'm going to come out other focused on the other side of this. Father, I pray that you meet people where they're at. In Jesus' name, amen.